As I sat alone in my dimly lit study, I reflected on how my life had changed. I used to think I had it all: a successful career, a cozy home, and a devoted wife. Now, only the first two remained. My thoughts drifted to my nearly 5-year marriage to Sarah. We met at Harper Investments, where she started in administrative support before becoming the executive assistant to my boss, Richard Harper, about 7 months ago. Richard S. father, George Harper, founded the company, and now Richard was being groomed to take over. Although Richard S.'s promotion to CEO was still a few years away, he quickly ascended to regional manager. I had a great deal of respect for George, who had helped me transition to civilian life after a serious injury in the Middle East. We met during my rehabilitation when George recognized my potential and offered me a job. Having just completed my degree in finance before being deployed, I accepted and started working for the company 8 years ago. I finished my recovery, earned an MBA, and eventually met Sarah at work. We fell in love and got married, with George generously funding our honeymoon to the Caribbean. A few years later, Richard joined the firm. Unlike his father, he was brash and often clashed with his colleagues. George expressed his worries about Richard S.'s behavior to me. "You know I'll have to make him regional manager eventually," George confided. "I am relying on you to guide him. Can you handle that?" "I'll try my best, but it won't be easy," I replied. "What's your honest opinion of him, Tom?" "No sugarcoating," George pressed. "He's arrogant and doesn't listen to others. He flirts too much and throws his name around." "Sarah says he has a harassment lawsuit waiting to happen," I responded. George sighed. "I was afraid of that. His mother spoiled him. I hoped the job would help him mature. I'll speak to him. When is Bob retiring?" "Bob Jenkins, the current regional manager, plans to retire in the next 6 months. He bought a place in Montana for his retirement," I explained. George promised to stay in touch and left. There were other troubling things I noticed about Richard, but chose not to share. Bob retired a few months later, and Richard stepped into the role. While he made some positive changes, Richard also micromanaged excessively, causing unrest among the staff. One day, Richard came to my office with a proposal. "I've been thinking about hiring a new EA, and I think Sarah would be perfect for the job," he said. "My wife." "Sarah?" I asked, surprised. "Yes, Gretchen is retiring soon, and we need fresh energy," Richard replied. "Have you spoken to Sarah about this?" I inquired. "Not yet. I wanted your opinion first." "What's she like at home?" Richard asked with a sly smile. I didn't like where this was heading. "Sarah and I are happily married, and she's a consummate professional. If you think she's a good fit, offer her the job. It is her choice, but keep in mind she is married to me." "I understand. If she takes the job, it might involve some travel." "Are you okay with that?" Richard pressed. "I trust my wife. If she takes the position, she knows our boundaries. I expect you to respect our marriage," I said firmly. "Of course, Tom. I respect you and your marriage," Richard said, still grinning. "There could even be a promotion for you down the line." That evening, I talked to Sarah. "Did you speak with Richard today?" "Yes, he mentioned the EA position," she replied. "What do you think?" I asked. "It means more travel and longer hours, but also a significant raise. We could save up for our future," Sarah said. "Are you worried about anything?" I asked. "I've heard the rumors, but do you trust me?" she asked. "Of course I trust you, but I don't trust him. He asked about our personal life, which felt off," I said. "That's just Richard." "What did you tell him?" she asked. "I said you are wonderful and that we are happily married," I replied. "Good. I think I'll take the job," Sarah decided. We went to bed, and though we tried to reconnect, there was a lingering unease. Sarah took the job, and soon she was traveling every 2 weeks and working late more often. I supported her, seeing no immediate cause for concern. Then, over 3 months ago, George suffered a sudden stroke and passed away. The company was in shock, and we all attended his funeral. Richard expected to become CEO, but the board appointed Laura Matthews as interim CEO, citing Richard's lack of experience. Determined to prove himself, Richard overburdened Sarah, making her travel more and work longer hours, straining our relationship. Our intimacy waned. Sarah's wardrobe choices became more daring, and she became irritable and demanding. One Sunday, after a trip to Boston, I confronted her. "Sarah, we need to talk." "About what?" she snapped. "About us. Richard S. demands are taking a toll on us. We need a break to reconnect. I am sorry. Richard S. under a lot of pressure. Things are hectic. Tell Richard you're taking a week as vacation." "We really do need this," I said. After a moment, Sarah nodded. "You're right, I'll talk to him tomorrow." The next day, Sarah came home looking cheerful. Richard agreed. "We can take next week off, but we need to attend a party at his place on Friday night." "A party? What kind?" I asked. "Just a small gathering with some friends," Sarah replied. I felt a bit uneasy, but agreed, as long as Sarah came home early the rest of the week. "Do you know any of these people?" "I've met a few," Sarah said, "mostly his college friends and a couple of clients. I'm not sure who else." "Okay," I said, "but come home at a normal hour this week, okay?" "I think so." We have a dinner meeting with the Jennings account on Wednesday, though. I knew the Jennings account was crucial, especially since George S.'s stroke. "All right, Wednesday night is fine, but home on time the rest of the week. Deal?" She smiled, wrapping her arms around me. "Deal," she whispered, kissing me. The next afternoon, Richard came into my office with a smirk on his face. "So Sarah says you were in for Friday night." "Yeah," I replied, "as long as she's home on time the rest of the week and we get next week off. We've got the Jennings dinner on Wednesday. What's the party like? Who will be there?" "It's just a casual get-together," Richard said. "A few college buddies and a client. Come casual. Just bring Sarah." I nodded. "By the way, Richard, Sarah is great at her job. I appreciate you letting her do it without any trouble. I'd be lost without her." Richard grinned. "I'm glad you were satisfied with her work. One thing, though." "What is that?" I asked. "Do you call her Sarah or something else?" "Sarah, of course. Why?" "Just curious," Richard said, and left. That night I asked Sarah, "Do you let Richard call you anything other than Sarah? You never let me call you by any nickname. He's my boss, he can call me whatever he wants," she said. I dropped the subject, but it nagged at me. The week went smoothly, and except for Wednesday night, Sarah was home on time. We spent a lot of time together, trying to reconnect. Friday night, I dressed casually and watched Sarah get ready. Her new dress was much shorter and more revealing than anything she usually wore. She had on a new necklace I hadn't seen before and no bra. The dress had slits up the sides, showing a lot of skin with an open back that nearly revealed the necklace S-chain. I could see her figure accentuated against the fabric. "Wow, you look stunning," I said, half jokingly adding, "Maybe we should just stay home." She smiled. Later, "Where did you get that dress? It doesn't look casual. I got it in New York. Richard asked me to wear it tonight." "Be careful, someone might get the wrong idea," I cautioned. She chuckled. "I don't think so. Everyone knows their boundaries." "They better," I said, hugging her. I tried to kiss her, but she waved me off. "Later, I don't want to mess up my makeup." We drove to Richard S. townhouse in an upscale part of town. As Richard opened the door, I caught a whiff of marijuana and felt uneasy. 3 young men were introduced: Sam Whitaker, Tony Fleming, and Dave Jensen, who worked for Jennings. "Guys, this is Tom," Richard said with a grin. "Tom, meet Sam, Tony, and Dave." I shook hands with each of them, puzzled by why Richard called me the man of the hour without introducing Sarah. "My God, Sarah, you look incredible in that dress," Richard said, as the men nodded in agreement while Sarah modeled the dress. I didn't like Richard's reaction. "Let me get you drinks." "Sarah, white wine?" "Tom, what about you?" "That is fine." "I don't drink much," I replied, though I actually had a high alcohol tolerance but had quit drinking years ago. I didn't want to risk it tonight. Richard returned with the drinks. Sarah took a big sip while I took small sips to stay sober. Richard invited everyone to the living room. I noticed Sarah sat on a love seat and Richard quickly sat next to her. I took a seat opposite them, watching closely. "Sorry, old buddy, force of habit," Richard said with a smirk. "No problem," I replied, glancing at my wife. The conversation flowed until Richard brought up my military service. "My dad said you were in the Marines?" "Yes, 5 years before a medical discharge," I answered. Sam asked, "Did you ever see combat? Did you, eliminate anyone?" I nodded. Sarah looked surprised. "You never told me that." It's not something I like to talk about, I said. Tony pulled out a bag of marijuana and rolled a joint, passing it around. I declined. Thanks, but no. I prefer to keep a clear head. Lighten up, Tom. It is a party, Richard insisted. You go ahead. I'd rather stay sober, I said. Your loss, Richard shrugged. Besides, you can crash here if you get too messed up. You're off next week anyway. He turned to Sarah. Right, Sarah? She smiled and nodded. Sure. Richard blew smoke into her mouth, and she inhaled, coughing slightly. That's good stuff, she said. I was stunned, not recognizing this side of her. Richard handed the joint back to Tony. This guy, Richard said, pointing at me, is the best business analyst in the company. He saved us millions and brought me this wonderful assistant. Sarah smiled at Richard, and I noticed it was more than just a polite smile. She seemed captivated by him. I think of her as my work wife, Richard said, patting Sarah's bare thigh. I thought I saw his hand slip slightly under her dress before pulling back. I'd be lost without her, Richard added. So would I replied, watching Sarah look down. I need to use the restroom, I said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. First door on the left, Richard directed. In the bathroom, I locked the door and looked at myself in the mirror. The thought that Sarah might be cheating with Richard hit me hard. I remembered George S.'s advice about paying attention to details. Sarah S. revealing dress, her interactions with Richard, her sudden use of pills, and Richard calling her his work wife were all red flags. I decided I needed proof. I discreetly started recording video on my phone and returned to the living room. When I came back, I saw Sarah quickly sit up, and there was a trace of white powder on her nose. The others had some too. I sipped my drink and noticed undissolved powder at the bottom. What the hell? I felt suddenly tired and disoriented. Are you okay? Sarah asked. Richard and the others stood up, Sarah grabbing Richard's arm. I tried to stand but couldn't. Take a nap, Tom, Richard said as they put my feet up. Sarah removed my shoes, and I noticed her necklace on the love seat. Sarah covered me with a blanket. I'm sorry, Tom. I really do love you, she whispered, kissing my forehead as I fell into a deep sleep. When I woke up, the house was dark and silent, except for the sound of snoring upstairs. I realized I'd been out for over 3 hours. I stopped the video recording and quietly crept upstairs. In the master suite, I saw Sarah lying naked on Richard's bed, one leg draped over him. One of the other men was also undressed next to her, while the other two slept on a couch and in a recliner. I quietly returned downstairs, determined to find out what they drugged me with. I rummaged through Richard's kitchen and found a Tupperware container, pouring my drink into it and sealing it. Back in the living room, I took Sarah's keychain from her purse and found an unfamiliar key, which I pocketed. I also grabbed Sarah's phone, intending to check it later, and placed my wedding ring on her purse, hoping she'd see it. I put on my shoes and quietly left, making sure not to turn on my car lights until I was on the street. I drove to a convenience store and called my old friend Pete Evans, who ran a private investigative firm. Hello, a sleepy Pete answered. Hey, Pete, it's Tom. Sorry to call late, but I need your help. What is up, Tom? You need bail or something? Not quite. Can you be at my place in 20 minutes? Yeah, sure. Everything all right? I'd rather not talk about it over the phone. Gotcha. See you in 20. Thanks, buddy. I bought a 12-pack of beer and a pack of cigarettes. I hadn't smoked since leaving the military, but I needed something to calm my nerves. At home, I put the beer in the fridge, lit a cigarette, and sat on the couch, using a candy dish as an ashtray. Pete arrived, and I offered him a beer. I explained the night's events, and he listened in shock. Holy crap, Pete said when I finished. I handed him the container with the drugged wine. Can you get this analyzed? Pete nodded. It'll be Monday or Tuesday before I get results. I need everything on Richard Harper, Sam Whitaker, Tony Fleming, and Dave Jensen. Jensen works for Jennings Manufacturing. Here's a video of them. Got it, Pete said. Do you want surveillance inside Richard's place and yours? Yeah, if you can. I have a key. I didn't see a security system. Pete took the key. No problem. How'd you get this? I took it from Sarah's keychain. Pete nodded. You probably can use any video from inside his place as evidence. I figured. This is personal. I understand, Pete said. I handed him an extra key to my house and the security system code. I can set up equipment now, Pete offered, returning the key. High-def cameras, audio, even record landline calls. Do it, I said. How much will this cost? Don T, worry about it. You saved my skin in the Middle East. This is the least I can do. Thanks, old friend. At least let me cover your costs. All right, Pete said. Let us go through the video for clues. I started the video from the beginning. Stop right there, Pete said. I paused it. Back up a bit. We watched as the camera captured Sarah finishing a line of white powder on the coffee table. Damn, I said. I saw her just as she sat up. That definitely looks like powder on the table. Yes, it does, Pete replied. Interesting. Have you ever known Sarah to use drugs? I shook my head. No, never. Let's see what else is on here, Pete said. We resumed the video, watching as I sat on the couch across from Sarah. Hold up, Pete said again. I paused the video. What's that on the love seat? Pete asked. I looked closely. It's Sarah's necklace. I saw it before I passed out, but thought I was imagining it. She must have taken it off after I went to the bathroom. We resumed the video and watched as the drug took effect on me. The camera showed me lying down, the others looking down at me. They heard Sarah ask if I was okay, and Richard telling me to take a nap. Richard leaned in closer and whispered in my ear, "Are you sure you don't want to tie him up and make him watch us?" Tony suggested. "No," Sarah replied firmly. "This is enough for one night. We have plenty of time. We can always escalate things if he doesn't comply," Richard smirked. "John here swings both ways. Maybe he could show Tom the other side of life," he added with a laugh. My blood boiled as I heard Sarah chuckle along. "I'd be curious to see that," she said. "Really?" John asked, eyes gleaming. "You'd let me. Have your husband?" "Sure, why not?" she responded. "Maybe if you are nice, you can convince him to try more." The group erupted into laughter again, and John joked, "I've never been with a Marine before, but I doubt he can do it as well as you." I struggled to keep my composure, my hands gripping the phone tightly. "Seriously, Richard, is he going to be okay? You didn't give him too much, did you?" Sarah inquired, sounding slightly worried. "Nah, he is fine," Richard reassured her. "He'll be out for about 12 hours and wake up with a nasty headache. He'll think he overdid it on the booze. Tomorrow I'll introduce him to some real stuff. By the end of the week, Tom will be a full-fledged user. Maybe I'll even have him work for me like a real street hustler. Too bad old George isn't around to see his golden boy crumble." "Is that why you despise him?" Sarah asked, her tone curious. "That's all I heard about in college," Richard continued, bitterness creeping into his voice. "How Tom served his country while getting a degree, how he balanced duty and education. Sometimes I thought Dad wished Tom was his son instead of me. Well, guess what, Dad? I am in charge now. I have Tom S. woman, and by next week your golden boy will be strung out." They all laughed again. "You guys with me?" Richard asked. They all voiced their agreement. "What about you, Sarah? Are you with me? If not, you'll be out there on the streets too." "I am with you, babe," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I have come to enjoy this too much to walk away." The group assumed she was talking about Richard's charm. "All right then," Richard declared. "Let us go upstairs and get this party really started." "Great," Sarah said, following them. This time, Don T. held back. The video continued recording, capturing the sounds from the bedroom. I stopped it and buried my face in my hands, the weight of betrayal crashing down on me. Pete put a supportive hand on my shoulder. "This is tough, but we'll get through this," Pete said. I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. "Thanks, Pete. What should I do next?" "Divorce is definitely on the table," I said, determination in my voice. "I get it. But first, why don't you get away for a few days? Let me handle the rest." "What are you planning?" I asked, concerned. "It's better if you don't know. We've got evidence of a criminal conspiracy here. Someone's going down, but we need to keep you safe." "But I want to help," I insisted. Pete shook his head. "No, you were too close to this. Remember Sergeant Johnson? He's in Vegas now. He owes me a favor and can help you lay low." "All right. But first, let's get the place wired for audio and video," I suggested, focusing on the next steps. "Okay," Pete agreed. "Stay sharp, okay?" "Yes, thanks, Pete. You are a true friend." Pete smiled. "Semper Fi, brother. We've got this." "Hoo-yah," I replied, though my voice wavered. I stepped out to the porch with a beer while Pete set up the surveillance equipment in the house. He wired the rooms and tapped the phone, setting up the system to upload recordings to a secure cloud server. He handed me the access information and the switch for the system. "I'll call Johnson tomorrow and get things set up. Don't to do anything rash, okay? I understand, Pete. Good. Hang tough, my friend. I'll be in touch. Thanks again for everything," I said as Pete left. I sat down at my computer and checked our bank accounts. I had a separate account from before our marriage where I'd been stashing 10 of my earnings, a surprise fund I had intended for Sarah. I transferred half of our joint account funds into this old account and paid off and canceled our joint credit cards. I still had a personal credit card from before the marriage. I packed clothes for a few days and loaded the suitcases into my car. Back inside, my eyes fell on our wedding portrait over the fireplace. Seething with rage, I slashed the portrait with a hunting knife and threw all photos of Sarah into the fireplace. I added her wedding dress but decided to wait before setting it all ablaze, wanting her to witness the destruction. Grabbing another beer, I emailed the incriminating video to myself and confirmed the upload on my laptop. I then composed a detailed letter to each board member and David, the interim CEO, outlining the events that had transpired. I emphasized the morals clause in Richard S.'s contract and the potential legal and reputational risks his actions posed. I expressed my respect for George and urged the board to take appropriate action. Satisfied, I attached the video and sent the email, informing them that I would be on vacation but available by phone or email. I expected a response by Tuesday and planned to be far away by then. I sat back, lit another cigarette, and watched as the flames in the fireplace charred Sarah S.'s face in the photos, feeling a grim satisfaction. Then, I unlocked her phone using the passcode I knew and began combing through her texts. He felt a surge of anger as he scrolled through Sarah S.'s messages. They had been seeing each other for at least 6 months, but in the last 3, Sarah had become increasingly disrespectful. He found numerous explicit photos Richard undressed, Richard and Sarah making out and dancing in a nightclub, likely during one of her so-called business trips to New York. There were also graphic images of Sarah with multiple men, including the 3 from the party. The videos were even worse, showing Sarah engaged in various acts with Richard and others, including those men. He realized this was what she had been doing under the guise of work trips. The betrayal hit him like a punch to the gut. Furious and disgusted, he copied everything and emailed it to himself using her phone. By the time he was done, he downed 6 beers and smoked half a pack of cigarettes using her photos as ashtrays. As dawn broke, he knew Sarah would wake soon and find him gone. Expecting her to wake within an hour or two, he grabbed his loaded shotgun, locked the door, and lay on the couch, trying to get some rest. At 8:30 a.m., Sarah woke up, checked the clock on Richard S.'s nightstand, and went to the bathroom to freshen up. By the time she came out, Richard and the others were already up. Richard threw on a robe and gave her a knowing smile. "Want to go downstairs and start breakfast?" Richard asked. "Tom might need some coffee if he says waking up." "Sure," she said, slipping into a robe and padding downstairs. She started a pot of coffee and went to find Tom in the living room, but he wasn't there. The blanket was tossed aside and his shoes were gone. Panicking, she ran around checking the bathroom and other rooms, but he was nowhere to be found. She glanced outside and saw that the car was gone and his wedding ring was on her purse. "Oh, crap," she gasped, sprinting upstairs. Richard stopped her in the bedroom. "What's wrong? He's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "He must have woken up and left. He took the car and left his ring. Call him and get him back here." "Okay," she said, racing downstairs. She put Tom S.'s ring in her purse and frantically searched for her phone but couldn't find it. By then, Richard had come down as well. "My phone is gone. Use the house phone. You don't get it, it's full of texts, pictures, and videos. If he has it, he has seen everything. Don't panic. Just get him over here. We'll deal with it." Sarah picked up the house phone and nervously dialed Tom S.'s number. "Hello," Tom answered, sounding groggy. "Tom, sweetie, it's me. What do you want?" he growled, startling her. He had never spoken to her like that before. She realized he must be incredibly angry, but she had no idea just how much. Tom, honey, you weren't tea here when I woke up, and I was worried. Are you okay? What the hell do you care? Sweetheart, I need you to come pick me up at Richard S. house. Can you do that, please? Tom laughed coldly. Screw you. I might have been clueless before, but not anymore. You don't get to call me sweetheart or honey ever again, Tom. Please don't be angry. I do love you. Yeah, right. Tell me another lie. Tom, we need to talk. Damn right we do. Then come pick me up at Richard S. so we can talk on the way home. Wrong. I'm not coming over there. If you want to talk, walk, or call an Uber. The only thing we need to discuss is how to split everything up. What do you mean, split everything up? That S what happens in a divorce? I don't want a divorce. Can't we work this out? I didn't want to be betrayed and humiliated either. If you want to talk, come home alone. And don't bring Richard or anyone else, or I'll shoot them if they step on my property. Got it? Okay, I'll call an Uber. Do that and bring cash or your ATM card. Why? Because your credit card doesn't work anymore. Why not? I canceled it last night. Oh, she said quietly. By the way, know where my phone is? Yeah, it says here on the coffee table. Got an interesting collection of pictures and videos. Now I know what you've been doing these last few months. They all help my divorce case. Oh my God, Tom, I am really sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. Save your apologies for someone who cares. If you want to talk, come alone. I'll be there, Sarah said, ending the call. She looked at Richard, her face pale. Well? Richard asked. He's not coming. I have to go there to talk to him. All right, we'll drive you. She shook her head. No, he's armed. He said if any of you show up, he'll shoot. I've never heard him so angry. Richard thought for a moment, then went to his study. He returned with a syringe. Here's the plan. Put this in your purse, call an Uber, and we'll follow you to your place. When you get a chance, inject this into his arm. Then call me. We'll pick him up and put him in my trunk. What is it? She asked. A mix of heroin, a sedative, and something to knock him out. It works fast and won't hurt him. Just stick him with it and call me when he is out. Okay, she said, slipping the syringe into her purse. Just promise you won't hurt him. We'll do our best, right, guys? Richard said, looking at the three men who nodded and chuckled. Call for your ride. She arranged an Uber to pick her up in 30 minutes and went upstairs to finish getting ready. When the driver arrived, she left, with Richard and his friends following in a separate car parked a block away. They didn't notice the white van parked across the street. A few minutes after speaking to Sarah, Tom's phone rang. It was Pete. What's up? Tom asked. My team picked up a conversation between your wife and Richard, and her accomplices, Pete said over the phone. What? Mark asked, confused. Modern technology, my friend, Pete explained. A parabolic microphone picked up the conversation. Your wife is getting an Uber, and her buddies are following in another car. They were planning to drug you and kidnap you. It sits in her purse. She'll try to hit you with it when she can. My team will tail them. Damn, Mark muttered. Yeah, be careful. I'll text you when they are on the move. Turn on the surveillance gear when she gets there, and I'll monitor it. I am just down the street, and I'll call the cops when needed. Be ready. Okay, thanks. About half an hour later, Mark got the text on the move. Showtime, Mark thought, muttering to himself. He had about 20 minutes before they arrived, so he stashed the shotgun where Sarah wouldn't easily find it and activated the surveillance equipment in the kitchen. He grabbed a Ziploc bag for the syringe and a tissue. Watching from the window, he saw the Uber pull up, and Sarah exited the car, clutching her purse nervously. Mark turned on the fireplace, setting the photos and her wedding dress ablaze. As she walked in, Sarah grimaced at the cigarette smoke, and her eyes widened at the sight of the burning wedding dress and pictures. You're burning my wedding dress and our pictures? Mark, why are you doing this? Tears streamed down her face, but Mark remained stone-faced. I wanted you to see the result of your actions, he replied coldly. She glanced at the beer bottles and cigarette butts in the candy dish. I thought you had a low booze tolerance, and I never knew you smoked. I quit smoking, and as for drinking, I get mean when drunk. I almost killed a man once, so I chose not to drink again, just like you chose to become Richard S. Pawn. Oh my God, Mark, what have I done? You tell me, what happened to you? You used to be sweet and kind. Since when have you been using cocaine? Who are these men you've been with? Mostly clients, she admitted quietly. Richard made me do it. Your actions could ruin Harper Financial. How long have you been planning to drug me and assault me? Was that your idea or Richard S.? She looked genuinely shocked. I never, she began, but Mark cut her off. Shut up, he said, pulling out his phone. He played the recording of her and the others discussing their plans. Her face turned white as she heard her own words. How did you get that? She asked, stunned. It doesn't matter, Mark replied. What is important is that David and the board members now have this video. The police will have it too. We are getting divorced, and if I have my way, you'll be in prison for a long time. I just want to know why. You don't understand, she pleaded. It's a long story. Maybe you can tell me one day when I'm not so inclined to strangle you, Mark said. He saw her start to reach into her purse and ripped it from her hands, dumping the contents onto the coffee table. He picked up the syringe with a tissue. Is this what you planned for me? Do you even know what's in it? Not exactly, she whispered. Not exactly? He repeated sarcastically. You were going to inject me with this without knowing what it could do? You are one twisted woman. Did Richard tell you to do this? She nodded. Yes. So if Richard told you to jump off a bridge, would you do that too? You were supposed to inject me and then call him to come kidnap me, right? Ashamed, she nodded again. Pretty much. All right, here is what we're going to do. Call Richard, put it on speaker, and tell him you did it. I'll take it from there. And Don to let him know I am here. Got it? You want me to set him up? Yes. Any questions? She shook her head. No, I understand. Good. Now do it and no tricks. Mark watched as she called Richard and put the phone on speaker. Richard, it is me, Sarah. It's S done. He is out. Good girl. We'll be right there, Richard replied, ending the call. Sarah looked at Mark, panic in her eyes. He'll kill me when he sees you are not out. Tough luck. Remember, no signals or I might kill you myself. Mark sat in a recliner and pretended to be asleep when he saw Richard and his three buddies approaching through the window. He kept his eyes slightly open as they entered. Richard looked at the mess and started toward Mark. You did good, Richard told Sarah. Now we're going to put him in the trunk. As Richard reached for Mark, Mark sprang into action. He opened his eyes and struck Richard in the throat, stunning him. Before Richard could react, Mark kicked him hard in the groin. The other three men tried to intervene, but Pete S. team burst in, detaining them. Richard fell to his knees, gasping in pain. Mark slipped behind him, pulled out his hunting knife, and grabbed Richard S. hair, pressing the knife against his throat. Make your peace with God, Mark growled. I am going to slit your throat. Richard paled, wetting himself in fear, while Sarah recoiled in horror, barely recognizing the man she'd married. Just as Mark began pressing the knife into Richard S.'s skin, Pete shouted, Sergeant, Don, do it! Drop the knife! The police are on their way! He deserves to die! Mark shouted back, his voice shaking with rage. Pete knelt in front of Richard. Yes, he does, but not by your hand. If you kill him, you'll end up in prison. Let the authorities handle it, please, Pete urged, his voice firm and steady. As your friend, put the knife down. He will pay for what he's done. Mark glanced at Pete, feeling the trembling fear in Jake. Slowly, Mark lowered the knife and stood up. Pete quickly turned Jake over, zip-tied his hands, and then secured Sarah S.'s wrists as well. Tears streamed down her face as she watched a photo of her and Mark burn in the fireplace. Mark settled back on the couch, his eyes cold and detached, watching as Pete efficiently restrained both Sarah and Jake. Outside, Pete S. team had already detained the other three men on the lawn. The sound of police sirens grew louder as cruisers pulled up in front of the house. Give me your phone, Pete said. I'll handle the police before they come in. Mark handed over the phone and Pete stepped outside. Jake, his face pale and sweat-soaked, turned to Mark. My father always liked you more than me, Jake muttered, his voice breaking. That is not true, Mark replied icily. He just wanted you to grow up and take responsibility. Would you really have done it? Cut my head off? Jake asked, fear evident in his eyes. We'll never know, will we? Mark responded. But where you are going, you'll meet people who want to hesitate. And if you ever come after me again, I want to hesitate either. Jake's face crumpled, and he turned away. 3 large police officers entered the house, assessing the situation. They read Jake and Sarah their rights and escorted them out. One officer picked up the syringe, now in a plastic bag, from the coffee table. "Is this what they plan to use on you?" the officer asked Mark. "Yes," Mark confirmed, his voice steady. The officer took Mark's full statement, shaking his head. "You were lucky," he remarked. "No," Mark corrected. "I had my fellow Marine watching my back." The officer smiled, nodded, and said Semper Fi, shaking Mark's hand. "Hoo-yah," Mark replied, feeling a strange sense of closure. After the police left, Pete rejoined Mark on the couch. "Got another one of those?" he asked, nodding toward the beer bottles. "Think I've got a couple left," Mark said, retrieving a cold bottle. "Early for this, isn't it?" "Not after what just happened," Pete replied, taking the beer. "How are you holding up?" "Okay, I guess. Feels like I've been through a war again. Need to decompress." "Yeah, I get that," Pete said, handing Mark a card. "I talked to Gunny. He'll take care of you if you want to lay low in Vegas for a few days. Here's his number." "Thanks," Mark said, looking at the card. The other card was for a divorce lawyer, Michelle Hawkins. "She hates cheaters. She's expecting you at 8:00 a.m. Monday," Pete explained. "Thanks for everything, Pete," Mark said, feeling the weight of the situation settle in. "Semper Fi, brother." "We've got this," Pete replied. "Hoo-yah," Mark responded, though his voice was weary. After finishing their beers, Pete stood up. "You've got some cleaning to do. I'll be back later to pick up the surveillance gear." Pete left, and Mark began the grim task of cleaning the house. That afternoon, he received a call from David Matt, the interim CEO of Harper Financial. "Mark, it is David Matt," the voice on the other end greeted. "Yes, Mr. Matt, how can I help you?" Mark responded. "Call me David. We saw the video and agree with your letter. It was quite an eye-opener." "Thank you, David. You are welcome. We have decided to terminate both Sarah and Jake S. employment immediately, given their current situation. I am heading to the county jail to handle it personally. There S. more." "What is it?" Mark asked, bracing himself. "The board and I think you should take a few days off. Do you have somewhere to go?" "A friend offered to put me up in Vegas. I've got a divorce lawyer appointment Monday, then I'll head out. Vegas sounds like a good plan. Take the time you need. We'll see you a week from Monday." "Thanks, David. Also, we've unanimously decided you to be the best person to take Jake's role." "Me?" Mark was stunned. "Yes, you have handled this situation remarkably well, and the board values your dedication. There will be a significant salary increase and additional benefits. Thank you, David. Don't thank me yet. You'll be overseeing an external audit of everything Jake managed. The auditors will report directly to you, and you will report to me. I think that's necessary. I've learned Jake had Sarah, involved with clients. That's appalling. Well, we'll leave that in your capable hands. Enjoy your time off, and we'll see you in a week. See you then, David." After the call, Mark finished cleaning the house and mowed the lawn. He called Gunny Johnson, who was thrilled to hear from him. "So, you're coming out to Vegas, huh?" "Gonna be good to see you," Gunny said. "Yeah, I need a break," Mark replied. "All right, come on out. I'll set you up with a nice place. Just remember, it's Vegas, not Bangkok." They both chuckled. "I'll keep that in mind," Mark said. "See you soon," Gunny responded. Later, Pete came by to pick up his surveillance equipment. Quick update: the cops searched Jake's place. They found a lot of drugs, explicit videos, and more. He is in deep trouble. "Good riddance," Mark muttered. Pete stayed for dinner, and Mark fell asleep shortly after, exhausted in every way. The next day, Mark gathered all of Sarah's belongings into trash bags and stashed them in the garage, planning to donate them once her legal fate was clear. The following morning, Mark arrived at Michelle Hawkins' office at 8:00 a.m. sharp. As he laid out his case, she took notes and explained California's divorce laws, which typically favor equal asset division. However, since they had no children and the house was his before marriage, he could expect to keep it. Mark listened, determined to close this chapter of his life for good. Mark met with Michelle Hawkins, the divorce attorney, to discuss the details. She explained that, given California's laws, Mark would likely keep the house, while Sarah would get half of their bank accounts. Her infidelity couldn't be used against her in the divorce proceedings, but the criminal charges might influence the judge's decision. Michelle also mentioned that Mark probably wouldn't have to pay spousal support while Sarah was incarcerated, although that could change upon her release. "I'll make this as painless as possible," Michelle assured him. I'll draft the papers and have them served. If she signs, we'll present them to the judge, and then it's a 6-month wait." Mark agreed and left a retainer with her before heading to the county jail to inform Sarah of his decision to file for divorce. Sitting at a table in the visitation area, he watched as Sarah, looking haggard in an orange jumpsuit, was brought in. They picked up the handsets to communicate through the plexiglass partition. "Hello, Sarah." "Hello, Mark. I wanted to let you know I am filing for divorce. I saw an attorney today." "I figured you would," she said, her voice subdued. "Is my arraignment tomorrow morning?" "Yes, and the prosecutor is asking for no bail," Mark confirmed. "That's probably for the best," Sarah admitted, looking down. "Can you tell me something honestly?" "What?" Mark asked, his voice cold. "What happened to you?" She looked up, her eyes pleading. Mark sighed. Things were going well at first. Richard seemed like any other executive. But after George died, Richard got furious when he wasn't promoted and blamed you. He thought his father had set things up for you. "That's absurd," Mark said. "George wanted Richard to eventually take over." "I know," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "We went to New York that weekend. At a club we were with clients, dancing and drinking. I flirted a bit, but didn't think I was out of line. Next thing I know, I felt really good and ended up in bed with 2 guys. Richard joined in later." She paused, struggling to continue. "The next morning, I felt guilty. Then Richard showed me pictures and videos he took and said I had to do whatever he wanted or he'd show you. So he blackmailed you," Mark said, disgusted, "and probably drugged you too." "He did," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He confessed later. "No surprise they found pills at his place. He got me on cocaine and other drugs." "How many clients did you sleep with?" Mark asked, trying to remain calm. "I don't know. Several." She shrugged. "Richard set it all up whenever we traveled." Mark shook his head, a mixture of pity and anger flooding his thoughts. "From the videos, it seemed like you enjoyed planning to drug me and turn me into a drug user for Richard. Was Wednesday's dinner really about the Henderson Project?" he asked, already knowing the answer. She shook her head. "No, it was about planning Friday's party." "So you planned it all in advance," Mark said, his voice hardening. Sarah nodded. "Yes, I'm sorry, Mark. That is the first thing you've said that I believe. Can you forgive me?" she asked, tears welling in her eyes. Mark chuckled darkly. "Not just no, but hell no. You cheated on me with that scumbag and who knows how many others, then plotted to drug and assault me. You were out of your mind. And dawned to even think about asking if we can be friends. I understand, Mark," she whispered, defeated. "I hope it was worth it. Goodbye, Sarah." He hung up the phone, watching as tears fell down her cheeks. Then, without looking back, he left the jail and headed home to pack for his trip to Vegas. In Vegas, Mark met up with Gunny Johnson. They reminisced over dinner, and Gunny gave him a tour of the city, offering gambling tips and escorting him to his room. Inside, a young brunette sat on the bed, standing as they entered. "Mark, this is Candy," Gunny said. "She'll be your tour guide while you are here." "Gunny, this isn't necessary," Mark began, uncomfortable. "Listen, son, this is exactly what you need after what you've been through. Relax, have a good time, and remember, what happens here usually stays here," Gunny added with a grin. They laughed, and Gunny left the room. Mark turned to Candy. "Tell me, are you an escort?" "Not anymore," Candy said with a soft smile. "Thanks to Gunny, I am out of that life. I am clean, going to school, and working a real job. He told me about you and asked if I'd spend time with you. That's all. If you'd prefer, I'll leave and never bother you again." "No," Mark said, shaking his head. "Gunny is right, I could use some company, and you are a very lovely woman. Would you like to go out for a drink?" "That sounds nice," she replied, smiling warmly. They went to a club, had a few drinks, talked, and danced for hours. Back in his room, Candy helped Mark forget his troubles, and he woke the next morning to find her beside him. They showered together, got dressed, and as she prepared to leave, Candy said, "I have classes today, but I can meet you back here tonight if you'd like." "Sounds like a plan," Mark replied, kissing her goodbye before she left. He then went downstairs for breakfast and tried his luck in the casino, following Gunny's advice. He walked away with about $300, which he spent on dinner, drinks, and a show with Candy that night. Once again, she helped him escape his thoughts. The rest of the week passed in a similar fashion, with Mark gradually feeling more at peace. By Friday, he was ready to return home and move on with his life. Candy seemed sad to see him go, but understood. She gave him her phone number and email address in case he wanted to keep in touch. Mark appreciated her company, but doubted it would turn into anything more serious. She was much younger and had her whole life ahead of her, while he had a lot to sort out. Still, he couldn't help but think, as he prepared to leave, that maybe, just maybe, he could start fresh, leaving the pain and betrayal behind. Driving home, Mark felt an unexpected smile form as thoughts of Candy filled his mind. He had needed that break, the distraction and the simple companionship she offered. Upon returning home, he caught up on the news about Sarah and her group. The judge, after reviewing the prosecutor's evidence, had ordered them all held without bail. Michelle confirmed that Sarah had been served with the divorce papers and had signed them immediately. In 6 months, Mark would be free of her for good. The following Monday, Mark returned to work, finding his belongings already moved into Jake's old office. Everyone welcomed him back and congratulated him on his new position. He settled in and met with the external auditors, ensuring they were set up properly. His new assistant, Marcia Bowden, who he'd known for several years, was also there to help him transition. Marcia was a capable and professional assistant, married and well-regarded by her previous supervisors. She knew about his situation, but wisely avoided bringing it up. The audit uncovered several irregularities in Jake's paperwork, including padded expense accounts from trips he and Sarah had taken. Worse, they discovered that Jake had mishandled client accounts, leading to an SEC investigation and subsequent federal charges. Mark and David spent the next few months cleaning up the mess Jake had left behind. Fortunately, they managed to retain all their clients thanks to their prompt action, though they endured several uncomfortable meetings with understandably upset executives. Meanwhile, Mark maintained contact with Candy, mostly through emails. Eventually, she informed him that she had met someone at school and was getting serious. He wasn't too surprised and wished her well, feeling a bittersweet pang at the news. Around the same time, the trials for Sarah and Jake dragged on, with more charges and legal motions piling up. Mark found himself testifying against his wife and her accomplices, despite her defense team's efforts to dissuade him. "I may not be required to testify against her," Mark told her lawyer, "but I want to. And besides, in a few weeks, she won't be my wife anymore." The jury was shocked by his testimony, especially when the video Mark had taken that Friday night was played in court. Finally, the day came for the jury to deliver their verdicts. Mark and David sat in the courtroom as Sarah, Jake, and the other 3 men were brought in, none able to meet Mark's eyes. The trial had turned into a media circus, with the courtroom packed and cameras clicking. The judge asked if the jury had reached a decision. The foreman stood and confirmed they had. Everyone held their breath as the judge read through the charges, which included conspiracy to kidnap and assault. Jake faced additional charges related to the drugs and lewd photos found at his townhouse. They were all found guilty on every charge. The judge set the sentencing date, and the convicted conspirators were led out of the courtroom. Mark and David exited, brushing past a throng of reporters. About 10 days later, the sentencing took place. The judge expressed his disgust with all 5 defendants, delivering harsh sentences. Jake's 3 accomplices received the lightest sentences, but still faced 20 years in prison. Sarah was sentenced to 25 years to life, and Jake received 50 years to life for his crimes, with additional federal charges pending. As Sarah was led away, she sobbed uncontrollably, while Jake stared at the ground, defeated. Jake's time in prison ended abruptly about 6 months later, when he was found dead in the shower, having angered the wrong inmates with his arrogant demeanor. A month after the sentencing, Mark was in his office going over paperwork when Marcia buzzed him. "Mr. Hurley, there's a Dr. Kristen Marcus here to see you." The last name caught Mark's attention. "Send her in." The door opened and an attractive blonde woman entered. Her hair fell below her shoulders and she wore a skirt that just reached her knees. She smiled as she approached, extending her hand. "It's great to finally meet you, Mr. Hurley." He shook her hand and gestured for her to sit. "Please, call me Mark. Would you like something to drink? Coffee, tea? Coffee would be wonderful, black please, and call me Kristen." Mark asked Marcia to bring them each a cup of coffee and sat down as his assistant left the office. "Marcus," Mark said, studying her. "Are you related to Alan? His daughter, perhaps?" She smiled and shook her head. "No, I am his niece, I see. I'm surprised we haven't met before. I thought I knew everyone in Alan S. family. I've been quite busy. I was in France when Uncle Alan died and couldn't make it back for his funeral. So, what can I do for you?" he asked. "I just wanted to meet the man who brought my cousin down," she said with a slight smirk. "I take it there's no love lost between you two?" "None," she said quietly. "I'm just glad he's finally paying for his crimes. I am really sorry for what he did to you. From what I know, you didn't deserve any of it." "Thank you," Mark said. "I have heard a lot about you from your uncle, so you are a doctor. Are you a medical doctor?" "No, I have a PhD in business and economics. I teach at UCLA. My uncle and I shared many interests, but I'm more focused on academics. And no, I'm not interested in moving into the corner office upstairs." Mark laughed at that. They talked for a while longer before Kristen mentioned she had to get back to work. Mark, not wanting the conversation to end, found himself intrigued by her. "Listen, Kristen, I'd love to continue this discussion over dinner. That is, if you don't mind being seen in public with a lowly MBA." She smiled, her eyes sparkling. "There's nothing lowly about being an MBA, and I'd love to be seen with you in public. Dinner sounds great. How about Red Lobster tonight at 7:00? She handed him a card with her number and address. "Red Lobster it is," Mark said, taking the card from her. "I'll pick you up at 6:30 if that works." "I'll see you then, Mark." "It's been great meeting you," she said, before walking out. That evening, Mark learned from Kristen that Jake had tried to assault her when she had just turned 18. Ashamed and afraid of being blamed, she had never spoken up and avoided Alan S. family whenever possible. She also steered clear of relationships with men, spending months in therapy during college to deal with the trauma. Mark shared his own experiences with Jake and what happened with Sarah. Kristen was shocked but not surprised. "I am so sorry," she said. "You deserve much better." Mark and Kristen continued dating for several months, growing closer with each passing day. When Mark finally proposed, Kristen nearly tackled him, covering him with kisses. "I take it that's a yes?" Mark asked, laughing as she hugged him tightly. "No, that's a hell yes," she exclaimed. "Now carry me to bed and ravish me properly." "Yes, ma, am," Mark said, grinning as he lifted his future bride and carried her upstairs. As he did, he couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, things were finally looking up.